Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Join us for more gripping video from history, where every moment feels like you're living it yourself. Don't just watch history, experience it. The morning was still. Mist clung to the Hudson River like a shroud, hiding the jagged cliffs of Weehawken in a gray silence. Two men stood across from each other on a narrow grassy ledge, pistols in hand. Their breaths came sharp, visible in the summer air of July 11, 1804. One was Alexander Hamilton, former Secretary of the Treasury, architect of America's financial system, a man whose pen had shaped a nation. The other, Aaron Burr, Vice President of the United States, sharp-eyed, ambitious, carrying years of slights like burning coals in his chest. They faced one another not as colleagues, not as statesmen, but as enemies. And both knew only one would leave this ground unbroken. The seconds, their chosen witnesses, stood solemn, barely breathing. Tradition demanded silence. No negotiation remained. Honor had been challenged, and honor could only be answered in blood. Hamilton gripped his pistol. He had written the night before, almost confessing, he would throw away his shot. He could not stain his conscience with Burr's blood. Yet here he was, aiming across the distance at a man who had once been his ally, now turned executioner of his legacy. Burr, however, did not write of mercy. For years he had been dismissed, mocked, overshadowed by Hamilton's biting words. Dangerous, Hamilton had called him, unfit to lead. Those words had spread like poison, suffocating Burr's political ambitions. And so he came to this duel not for sport, not for honor alone, but for vengeance. The signal was given. Time seemed to fracture. The world narrowed to heartbeats and the polished weight of steel in the palm. Hamilton raised his weapon, hesitated, then tilted it skyward. His finger tightened not toward Burr, but toward the heavens. A deliberate miss. But Burr's arm was steady, his eyes cold. The crack of the pistol split the morning. Birds scattered from the cliffs. Smoke curled like a phantom between them. Hamilton staggered, eyes wide, as the bullet tore through his side. Crushing bone, ripping muscle, he collapsed against the rocky ground. His body trembling, his voice barely a whisper. The men around them rushed forward, horror etched on their faces. Burr lowered his pistol, lips pressed tight, as if he had not fired a weapon but struck down, the ghost of every insult he had endured. On that ledge above the Hudson, Alexander Hamilton's life bled into the earth. The nation would never be the same. This was not simply the end of a man. It was the birth of an American legend, and the death knell of Aaron Burr's future. The duel was over, but its echo had only just begun. Long before pistols were drawn at Weehawken, two boys were born into worlds that could not have been more different, yet both carried the fire of ambition in their veins. Alexander Hamilton's beginning was marked by shame. Born in 1755 or perhaps 1757, for he himself was never certain, on the small Caribbean island of Nevis, he entered life as the child of scandal. His father abandoned him. His mother, shunned by polite society, died when Alexander was still young, leaving him an orphan with nothing but hunger in his belly and brilliance in his mind. By candlelight, the boy scribbled essays so powerful they moved strangers to pity. Local benefactors read his words, fiery, desperate, pulsing with genius, and they paid to send him north to the colonies. Hamilton stepped onto the shores of New York not as a beggar, but as a young man convinced destiny had chosen him. Aaron Burr's story was cast in privilege but shadowed by loss. Born in 1756 in Newark, New Jersey, Burr was the son of one of the most respected families in the colonies. His father was president of Princeton. His mother was brilliant and deeply pious, the daughter of the great theologian Jonathan Edwards. But fortune was cruel. Both parents died when Burr was only 2 years old. Orphaned as well, Burr was taken in by relatives who drilled him in discipline, expectation, and the pursuit of honor. Where Hamilton clawed for survival, Burr was polished for greatness. He entered Princeton at just 13, dazzling professors with his intellect, graduating by 16. He moved with confidence, with charm, with the poise of a man born to command. And yet beneath the polish there was steel. Burr craved respect, not merely admiration. He played his cards close, concealing ambition beneath a gentleman's smile. Where Hamilton's words spilled in torrents, sharp, cutting, relentless, Burr mastered silence. He believed in strategy, in patience, in striking when the moment was right. The Revolutionary War brought them together, both young, both eager to carve their names into the newborn nation. Hamilton became George Washington's aide-de-camp, a pen that turned battles into victories through orders, speeches, and vision. Burr, meanwhile, proved himself a soldier of daring courage, charging into the thick of danger without hesitation. They might have been allies, brothers in arms bound by independence. But ambition is a jealous god. Hamilton believed in building systems, in shaping the chaos of revolution into lasting order. Burr believed in opportunity, taking power when it appeared without apology. Two orphans risen from nothing and everything. Two men who would not bend, who could not share the same space in history's light. The seeds of rivalry were already sown, and one day they would grow into bullets fired at dawn. The revolution was a furnace, and in its fire both Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr were tempered. Yet even here, where men bled side by side for liberty, the gulf between them widened. Hamilton first caught the eye of General George Washington with his fearless courage at the Battle of Trenton. A slight young man with burning eyes, he rode through cannon fire, rallying troops with the authority of a veteran twice his age. Washington saw not just bravery in Hamilton, but brilliance and intellect that could craft strategies, letters, and treaties with equal force. Soon Hamilton was not simply a soldier, but Washington's aide-de-camp, his right hand, his voice on parchment, his echo in councils of war. Burr, meanwhile, earned his reputation in the thick of combat. At the Battle of Quebec, he dragged the wounded through snow and blood. At Monmouth, he fought in the sweltering heat, refusing to yield ground even as bullets screamed past. His men adored him, not for speeches but for presence. Burr was the kind of leader who stood where danger was sharpest, silent but unflinching. And yet there was bitterness. For while Hamilton ascended into Washington's inner circle, Burr found himself overlooked, his battlefield valor admired but not rewarded with the same influence. Washington never warmed to him. Burr's brilliance was cool, reserved, calculating, traits the general mistrusted. The two young officers crossed paths not as friends but as wary equals. To Hamilton, Burr was a man of talent wasted on caution. To Burr, Hamilton was reckless, too quick with words, too eager to display his fire. Respect simmered, but so did envy. In the chaos of war, small moments etched themselves into memory. Hamilton, quill in hand, commanding orders that would shape entire campaigns. Burr, sword drawn, charging into the smoke where men fell screaming. Each saw the other, and each measured himself against the other. The revolution ended in victory, but for these two men, it was only the beginning of another battlefield. Politics. Hamilton stepped from the war with Washington's trust and a vision burning. In his chest, the creation of a strong central government, a financial system that would outlive the revolution's passions. Burr left the war with scars, both visible and hidden, determined to claim the honor denied him by Washington's cold regard. They were war brothers, yes, but already silent enemies. And in the years ahead, their rivalry would no longer be hidden behind gunpowder smoke. It would be played out in halls of power, in elections, in whispered words that carried the weight of daggers. The revolution forged a nation, but for Hamilton and Burr it forged a collision course. The war had ended, but peace did not bring unity. The newborn United States was fragile, its future uncertain, its leaders divided on what kind of nation it should become. And in that fragile dawn, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr chose different paths that would soon set them on a collision course. Hamilton emerged as a visionary, with Washington's trust behind him. He took the role of the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury. Where others saw chaos, Hamilton saw architecture. He built systems from nothing, establishing a national bank, binding the states to a central government, giving the young republic the spine it needed to stand against the storms of the world. To him, order was freedom's guardian. Without structure, liberty would devour itself. But structure came at a cost. Hamilton favored the wealthy merchants, the bankers, the elite who could stabilize the nation. To the common farmer, it reeked of monarchy reborn. His enemies painted him as a man eager to crown kings in all but name. And among those enemies were many who would one day stand with Aaron Burr. For Burr, politics was not about systems but opportunity. He returned to New York and quickly established himself as one of the city's most cunning politicians. He knew how to win people, not through lofty ideals or grand speeches, but through charm, through listening, through understanding what they wanted most and giving it to them. To Burr, power belonged to the one who could seize it in the moment. Hamilton despised this. To him, Burr was a chameleon, changing colors with the crowd, lacking principle, serving only ambition. Dangerous, Hamilton whispered in letters and speeches. A man who stands for nothing but himself. And Burr in turn grew weary of Hamilton's ceaseless attacks. He watched as Hamilton built enemies, not only among political rivals but within his own party, his fiery words alienating even those who once stood at his side. Burr learned something crucial. Hamilton's brilliance was his weapon, but also his weakness. The city of New York became their chessboard. Hamilton moved pieces through policy and press. Burr through elections and alliances. They were two predators circling the same ground, sensing the inevitability of conflict. The nation was being born, but it was not a peaceful birth. It was violent, messy, split between Federalists and Republicans, between visions of a strong central government and dreams of individual states' power. And within this storm, Hamilton and Burr became symbols of the divide. Two orphans once shaped by the same revolution were now shaping America in opposite directions. And with every law passed, every election won or lost, the tension between them grew sharper, like two blades waiting to cross. The year was 1800 and the nation stood on edge. The young republic was still fragile, still finding its voice. And now it faced a storm unlike any before, an election that would decide not just its leader, but its very soul. On one side stood Thomas Jefferson, the eloquent Virginian, champion of states' rights and the common man. By his side, though not always in agreement, stood Aaron Burr, a man whose polished charm and political cunning made him indispensable to Jefferson's cause. Together they formed the Democratic-Republican ticket, a force that threatened to sweep away the Federalists once and for all. On the other side stood John Adams, the sitting president, struggling beneath the weight of unpopular decisions and a fractured Federalist Party, and behind him, whispering, writing, maneuvering with relentless energy, was Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton detested Jefferson's philosophy, but he despised Burr far more. To Hamilton, Jefferson was at least a man of principles, flawed principles, perhaps, but principles nonetheless. Burr, Hamilton insisted, was a man with none, the most unfit and dangerous man of the community. Hamilton wrote, warning that Burr's ambition was bottomless, that he would sacrifice the nation itself if it served his rise. The election raged with venom. Newspapers screamed accusations. Federalists and Republicans slandered each other with words as sharp as bayonets, and when the votes were counted, history itself seemed to gasp. Jefferson and Burr had tied, each with 73 electoral votes. The Constitution dictated that the House of Representatives must decide. But here Hamilton saw his chance. He lobbied furiously, urging Federalists not to support Burr, though Burr was technically of their own factional advantage. Jefferson has beliefs, Hamilton argued. Burr has none. For 36 ballots, the House deadlocked. The nation teetered on the edge of chaos, whispers of civil war in the air, and in the shadows Burr remained silent, calculating. He had no intention of stepping aside. If fate delivered him the presidency, he would seize it with both hands. At last, thanks in part to Hamilton's behind-the-scenes pressure, the deadlock broke. Jefferson was declared the victor. Burr, humiliated, was forced to accept the vice presidency, but in that moment something darker was born. Burr could forgive Jefferson, perhaps. But Hamilton? Hamilton had not merely opposed him. He had branded him unworthy, unprincipled, dangerous before the entire nation. The wound was deep, and it would not heal. The election of 1800 had given America its first true transfer of power, but it had also lit a fire that would burn until pistols cracked on the cliffs of Weehawken. Aaron Burr stood on the Capitol steps in 1801. Hand raised, sworn in as Vice President of the United States. The moment should have been triumphant. An orphan boy from Newark, now second in command of a nation. Yet even as the cheers echoed, bitterness coiled inside him. For Burr knew his position was not a victory, but a consolation. He had been within inches of the presidency, and it was Alexander Hamilton who had snatched it away. Thomas Jefferson, the new president, trusted Burr little. Jefferson viewed him not as a partner, but as a tool, useful in winning New York, but dangerous if left unchecked. So Burr found himself isolated, cast adrift in his own administration, the vice presidency little more than a shadow. But Burr was not a man to vanish quietly. In New York, he wielded influence with surgical precision, building alliances, courting supporters, weaving a web of loyalty that stretched from city streets to state assemblies. His Tammany Hall machine grew powerful, an engine that could decide elections. And Hamilton watched. From his Federalist perch, he saw Burr's rise not as a natural step in politics, but as a threat to the very survival of the Republic. To Hamilton, Burr's charm was a mask. His politics nothing but opportunism dressed in fine clothes. The newspapers became their battlefield. Hamilton's essays, sharp as daggers, slashed at Burr's reputation. He called him unprincipled, reckless, a man who would climb any ladder so long as it led upward. He whispered in private, too, telling anyone who would listen that Burr's ambition was a disease. Burr, outwardly calm, inwardly seethed. He had endured insult before, but this was different. Hamilton's words were not mere gossip, they were poison, corroding his alliances, undermining his authority, staining his honor. The break widened in 1804. Jefferson, preparing for re-election, dropped Burr from the ticket. Without the presidency, without the vice presidency, Burr turned his eyes toward the governorship of New York. It was a prize he believed he could win, a platform to rebuild power, to prove his enemies wrong. But Hamilton was waiting. He campaigned relentlessly against Burr, denouncing him in whispers and speeches, in letters that spread like wildfire. Federalists who might have supported Burr recoiled under Hamilton's influence. When the votes were counted, Burr was crushed. Defeat hardened into rage. Burr could no longer shrug off Hamilton's insults as politics. They were personal now, wounds to his honor, his legacy, his very name. And in the world of gentlemen, honor demanded satisfaction. The stage was set. The duel was not yet declared, but its shadow was already falling. By the summer of 1804, Aaron Burr's career lay in ruins. He had lost the presidency, lost Jefferson's trust, and now, after Hamilton's relentless campaigning, lost the New York governorship. In the smoky taverns of Manhattan, men whispered that Burr was finished, undone not by chance, but by Hamilton's ceaseless tongue. And then came the letter. It was June when Burr received it, a published account of a dinner party where Hamilton had allegedly spoken of him with unusual venom. According to Dr. Charles Cooper, Hamilton had declared that he possessed a still more despicable opinion of Burr than words could express. Despicable. The word struck like a pistol shot. To a man of Burr's stature, to a gentleman who lived by reputation, this was no mere insult. This was a public execution of his honor. Burr sat in silence, the letter trembling in his hand. He had endured Hamilton's attacks for years, each one chipping at his legacy. But this was different. This was printed for the world to see. If he ignored it, he would be branded a coward. If he responded, he would risk everything. The code of honor was clear. Burr penned his reply, demanding Hamilton explain himself, demanding he retract or deny. Hamilton, as ever, was defiant. He refused to apologize. He claimed he could not recall the exact words, but insisted he had. Spoken nothing he would retract. His letters were a storm of justification, clever, evasive, but never conciliatory. Hamilton's pride was as fierce as Burr's rage, and neither man would bend. The exchange of letters stretched on, tense, brittle, each word a step closer to the inevitable. At last, Burr wrote the line that history would never forget. He expected Hamilton to meet him, according to the laws of honor. The challenge was made. Hamilton accepted. Whispers rippled through New York's elite. A duel, illegal, dangerous, fatal, was to be fought between the former Treasury Secretary and the sitting Vice President of the United States. It was madness. It was destiny. Hamilton confided to friends that he intended not to fire at Burr, that he could not stain his conscience with blood. He even drafted a final letter, explaining he would throw away his shot. Yet still he prepared to go. Perhaps pride drove him. Perhaps resignation. Perhaps he knew there was no escaping fate. Burr, meanwhile, made no such vows. He was calm, collected, as if destiny had finally delivered Hamilton into his hands. The arrangements were made, pistols, seconds dawn on the cliffs of Weehawken, New Jersey. The path was set. The letter had sealed it, and the nation was about to witness a reckoning that would echo for centuries. The sky above the Hudson River was pale with first light as the small boats pushed quietly from Manhattan's shore. Their oars dipped softly, carrying two men and their seconds across the water toward a secluded ledge at Weehawken, New Jersey. The date, July 11th, 1804. The hour, dawn. Dew clung to the grass as the party climbed the rocky path to the dueling ground. A narrow clearing tucked against the cliffs. The air was still heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alexander Hamilton walked with measured steps, his face pale but steady. In his pocket was a letter he had written the night before, a confession of sorts, declaring his intention to throw away his shot. He would not kill Aaron Burr, he could not. Honor demanded his presence, but conscience forbade bloodshed. Aaron Burr followed, composed, his expression unreadable. To those who knew him, he seemed almost serene. Yet inside, a furnace burned. Years of insults, slights, and humiliations had brought him here. This was not politics now. This was personal. The pistols were laid out, gleaming flintlocks heavy in the morning light. The seconds turned away as custom required, unable to witness the moment of truth. The distance was measured. 10 paces. The ground between them seemed to stretch into eternity. The command was given. Both men raised their weapons. Time slowed, suspended on the edge of destiny. Hamilton's arm lifted high, tilting toward the sky. His finger tightened, not on his enemy, but on fate itself. His shot cracked, splintering a tree above Burr's head. He had kept his vow. He had chosen mercy. But Burr did not hesitate. His pistol leveled, his eye unflinching. He pulled the trigger. The gunfire shattered the silence. Smoke curled like ghosts between them. Hamilton staggered, struck. The ball tore through his abdomen, crushing bone, ripping into organs. His knees buckled as he fell to the ground. His face twisted with pain, his breath ragged. The seconds rushed forward in horror. Burr lowered his pistol, his lips pressed tight, his gaze fixed on the man collapsing before him. For an instant, he seemed carved from stone, untouched by what he had done. Then, without a word, he turned and walked calmly back toward his boat. Hamilton lay gasping, whispering prayers, his eyes flickering toward the sky he had chosen to fire upon. The duel was over. But in that moment, as blood stained the grass at Weehawken, it was not only the end of a man, it was the end of an era. The shot had been fired. The nation would never be the same. The boat carried Alexander Hamilton back across the Hudson, his body trembling with each stroke of the oars. The bullet had torn through his ribs, shattered his liver, lodged deep near his spine. Blood soaked his clothes, his skin clammy, his face ashen. Yet still he clung to life, whispering faintly, his words a mixture of prayer and farewell. When they reached Manhattan, he was brought to the home of William Bayard, a close friend. There Hamilton was laid upon a bed, pale and writhing in agony. Doctors gathered, their faces grave, their hands useless against the mortal wound. The air was thick with the smell of medicine, candle wax, and despair. His wife Eliza arrived. Her footsteps faltered as she entered the room, eyes wide with horror. She fell to her knees beside him, clutching his hand. "Alexander," she whispered, tears streaming. "Do not leave me." Hamilton's eyes flickered open. His voice was faint, broken. "Remember, Eliza, you are the best of wives, and the best of women." The words cut deeper than the wound. Around them, friends gathered, Robert Troup, Gouverneur Maurice, others who had fought beside him in revolution and in politics. All stood silent, helpless, as the architect of America's financial system lay dying before their eyes. Outside, the city buzzed with whispers. News of the duel spread like wildfire. Shock, disbelief, outrage. Some mourned, others condemned. But in that quiet room, none of that mattered. Only the slow ticking of the clock counting down Hamilton's final hours. Through the night, he drifted in and out of consciousness. Pain racked his body, yet his thoughts remained on faith, on family, on the legacy he would leave behind. He asked to receive communion, his voice trembling with devotion. He begged his children to be raised in virtue, to honor their mother. As dawn broke on July 12, 1804, Alexander Hamilton exhaled his final breath. Silence fell over the room. Eliza's cry pierced the stillness, the sound of a heart breaking. The man who had risen from the depths of poverty to shape a nation was gone at only 49. New York wept. Thousands lined the streets for his funeral, black drapery hanging from windows, church bells tolling. Gouverneur Morris delivered the eulogy, his voice choked with grief. Hamilton was the friend of man, the firm supporter of freedom. But while one man was buried in honor, another walked in shadow. Aaron Burr, Vice President of the United States, was now branded a murderer. The bullet had ended Hamilton's life, But it had also ended Burr's future. The nation would never forgive. As Alexander Hamilton's body was laid to rest, Aaron Burr walked the streets of New York like a man pursued by ghosts. The duel had been fought in silence, but its echoes thundered across the nation. To Hamilton, death had given martyrdom. To Burr, survival brought only ruin. Whispers followed him everywhere. Murderer. Villain. Even those who once respected him now turned away. The newspapers blazed with fury, condemning Burr as a man unworthy of office, unworthy of honor. He had killed not just a political rival, but a founding father. And though dueling was a common ritual of honor, in this case the nation recoiled. Burr returned to Washington to finish his term as vice president. But he was a ghost in the halls of power. Jefferson barely spoke his name. Colleagues avoided his gaze. He presided over the Senate with outward calm, yet inside he knew his career was finished. When his term ended, he sought redemption in the only way he knew, ambition. He looked west, to the frontier lands beyond the Mississippi, whispering of empire, of new republics carved from wilderness. Some said he dreamed of conquering Spanish territories, even of crowning himself ruler of a new nation. His movement stirred suspicion. His allies faltered, and soon the government turned its gaze upon him. In 1807, Burr was arrested, charged with treason. The trial was a spectacle, the nation watching with morbid fascination as the man who had once been vice president stood accused of betraying the republic. Chief Justice John Marshall presided. The evidence was thin, circumstantial. Burr's brilliance as a lawyer shone through, and he was acquitted. But acquittal did not bring redemption. He walked free, yet friendless. His fortune collapsed. His name, once spoken with respect, had become a curse. He drifted in exile to Europe, wandering from court to court, dismissed by kings and ministers alike. No crown, no empire, no salvation waited for him. Years later, broken and forgotten, Burr returned to New York. He lived in obscurity, a shadow among the very streets where his rival was immortalized. Hamilton's words were etched in marble, his vision guiding the nation's banks. His name taught to children. Burr had only silence. In 1836, at the age of 80, Aaron Burr died alone in a boarding house. There was no grand funeral, no nation in mourning, only the memory of a duel, a single bullet, and a legacy drowned in infamy. The duel at Weehawken had taken one life, but destroyed two. One man rose in death to legend. The other lived on, haunted. A reminder of how ambition, pride, and the code of honor can shatter even the most brilliant of men. The nation had been changed forever. The duel ended with one man a legend, and the other a ghost. But our journey through history doesn't stop here. Make sure you subscribe and ring the bell. That way you'll never miss the next chapter of history brought to life.